Today's video is brought to you by Shudder. Now, if you are anything like me, my favorite movie genre is horror. I truly like it all. Slashers, paranormal, found footage, B-rated movies, all of them. And to me, Shudder is a blessing and is frequently on my TV, even if it's just background noise. I have personally had a Shudder account for years, and I can swear by it that it is the best horror streaming service. Often being called the Netflix of horror, Shudder has the largest and fastest growing curated selection of thrilling and dangerous entertainment. And I do mean large, from Shudder originals that can't be found anywhere else, to classics like Halloween, Carrie, Creepshow, and so much more. On top of the overwhelming selection of horror, you will also get to enjoy all of it ad-free on all of your favorite devices, from iPhone, iPad, Xbox One, Roku, Android, and more. And Shudder isn't just for that one time of year. You can enjoy horror year-round. To try Shudder free for 30 days, go to shudder.com and use promo code CADAVER. Once again, to get Shudder free for 30 days, go to shudder.com and use promo code CADAVER. That's Shudder, SHUDDER. There's an old saying that a mother's love is everlasting, that she would be there to guide, protect, and to teach us. And no matter what kind of circumstance occurs in life, that it would never be stronger than the love a mother has for her child. And one of the strongest examples of this is the tragic yet bizarre story of Christine Collins, who on March 10th, 1928, began a journey that would see her as both a hero in the eyes of some and a villain to others. A journey that would have her name become familiar across the state of California and eventually the entire country. Her story plays out as if it were from a book, with humble beginnings followed by a tragedy that leads to a shocking turn of events that seem almost impossible to occur in real life. And just like many stories, a monster lurks in the shadows. Christine Collins worked as a phone operator and was a single mother. Her ex-husband and father to her son was Walter Anson, whom at the time was serving a 40-year prison sentence for armed robbery in 1923. Their son was Walter Collins, a typical free-spirited 9-year-old boy. The story begins on March 10th, 1928, when Walter asks Christine for money to go see a movie. Christine gives him the money for a ticket and expects to see her son within a few hours. But as time passes and the sun begins to set, Christine's worry only grows more and more by the minute, as Walter should have been home by now. Eventually, Christine begins to go door to door, asking any of Walter's friends if they had seen him, or even if they had went with him to the movies. As Christine was met with the same answer over and over again, her concern grew into full-on panic. Knowing that Walter should have been home by now, she goes to the police to alert that her son is missing. The police wasted little time in beginning an investigation into locating the missing 9-year-old. At the time, much of the area was still feeling the residual fear from a few months prior, when a 12-year-old by the name of Marion Parker was kidnapped and killed by William Hickman. It sent the surrounding area into a lockdown, even though Hickman had since been arrested. It caused many parents to be even more alert. And for police, they feared that Walter's disappearance could be another case of what happened to Marion Parker. Some speculate that what eventually occurred in this case was a result of the pressure that the LAPD faced to quickly locate Walter, but I will talk more on this later in the video. At the start of the investigation, many felt the police were handling this as they should, with the seriousness of a missing, possibly kidnapped child. The massive attention that was focused on finding Walter was being noticed by everyone around. Newspapers, radio shows, and an outcry from the public was being seen all over. Christine herself was doing everything that she could do to aid in locating her son, telling anyone who would listen. Yet, for everything that was being done in an attempt to find young Walter, no clues were coming up, and virtually no progress had been made. For the first 5 months, the LAPD was at a loss for what happened, almost seeming as if Walter had vanished into thin air. The growing stress from the public didn't make this any easier, and many began to verbally attack law enforcement officers for not being competent to do their job. This led to a very tense relationship with the LAPD and the public. And while I can understand the frustration on the public's end and wanting to see this story have a happy ending, I can also sympathize with the LAPD. Keep in mind, this was 1928. For someone to suddenly up and vanish really wasn't that entirely difficult back then. After all, there were no street cameras. Walter wasn't walking around with a cell phone that could easily be tracked, and most information, if any, police were getting were simply from word of mouth. There were the occasional reports of potential sightings of Walter all over California, but none could be verified. Christine and the police began to wonder if Walter's father had any part to play in the disappearance. Not saying that he was directly involved, but due to him being in prison, there was speculation that he may have angered some people in there, and in turn, those on the outside kidnapped Walter as retaliation. Yet there was nothing that could be linked to that being the case. The growing pressure was seeming to reach a boiling point, and while heartbroken, Christine refused to accept that nothing could be done and continued doing all in her power to search for Walter. In the months that passed, while no progress was made, the attention on the case certainly grew. It was becoming talked about more and more by the day. It was becoming nationally known, and due to this gross publicity on the disappearance, more and more people were coming forward saying that they had seen Walter. But again, nothing could be proven that it was in fact him until August of 1928. In DeKalb, Illinois, a breakthrough in the case would happen from the last person anyone expected, and that was Walter himself. As word began to spread that Walter Collins was alive and well, police and Christine couldn't believe it. After 5 months of nothing, they finally got word from Walter himself that he is alive and well. And on top of that, that he was over 2,000 miles away in DeKalb, Illinois. Christine, wanting to be sure that this really was Walter and not some twisted joke, wrote several letters to Walter, and Christine also received pictures of Walter proving that he was alive. Walter was finally scheduled to return back home to his mother, and after she paid the $70 in travel costs to get him back safely, he finally arrived back home in Los Angeles. As a quick side note here, I think it's kind of f***ed up that this woman, after going through nearly half a year of not knowing if her son was alive or dead, was then forced to pay the travel costs to get him back. I realize this is probably overlooked by many, but when I read this, it stood out as a really messed up thing. Anyway, getting back to the story at hand, when Walter returned, the LAPD wanted to make the reunion of mother and son very public. At this time, the LAPD had begun to develop a bad public image, and they were very aware of it. Police had hoped that having the story have a happy ending for many to see would help their public appearance. So, as Walter was being reunited with Christine, and many happy and relieved faces watched on, the only one that wasn't smiling was Christine herself. The reason for this was because Christine knew from the second that she laid eyes on this boy that it wasn't Walter. Christine Collins was faced with something that she never thought she would experience. Not only had her son been missing for over 5 months at this point, but now her hope and relief that he had been found was immediately deflated when she saw the boy claiming to be Walter was in fact not him. Christine, not one to put up an appearance just for the sake of others, immediately fought the notion that the boy in front of her was Walter. Even when police were telling her that it was him, she flat out refused to accept this. The LAPD realized that at this point, one of two things could happen. Either acknowledge that this in fact was not Walter Collins and face the embarrassment and public shame that would come from that, or option 2, force Christine to accept that this was Walter and to take the boy home. Not shockingly, they decided on the second option. Captain J.J. Jones, who was leading the case, attempted to convince Christine that it was Walter. And I am not joking when I say this, but he actually told her to try the boy out, as if this child were some kind of tool or piece of clothing. Christine, perhaps not wanting to damage her relationship with the police, or if it were her own doubts, agreed, and took the boy, claiming to be Walter, home. For 3 weeks, Christine attempted to bond with the boy, yet all of her attempts were in vain, and the truth that she knew in her heart was becoming more and more obvious by the day. After 3 weeks of this, she finally returned to Captain Jones and told him that the boy was not Walter. Apart from the obvious, being that she was Walter's mother and would know better than anyone else if it was her son or not, she also provided dental records and statements from friends who all agreed that the boy claiming to be Walter was a fake. And when Captain Jones was faced with this overwhelming evidence that the boy was in fact not Walter Collins and that the real Walter was still missing and that the entire big public event that the LAPD made over this reunion was for nothing, Captain Jones did something that he felt was the best action to take. He berated Christine and then had her committed to a psychiatric ward at LA County Hospital under what was known as a Code 12, which was a term police used to arrest or commit someone that they deemed to be difficult or inconvenient. To say that Captain J.J. Jones reacted poorly would be massively understated. And as shocking as that may sound, it actually happened. Christine Collins, who was doing nothing wrong, who was solely looking for her son and who went to the people who were there to help, was then branded as a woman who had gone mad. At this point, more and more questions began to arise. To others, it was tough for them to determine if this really was Walter Collins, or if it was in fact someone pretending to be him. And if that was the case, then why would a boy want to take the identity of someone else? After Captain J.J. Jones had a child psychiatrist interview the boy and deemed him to be telling the truth that he was Walter Collins, many thought that would be the end of it. That was until, surprisingly, Captain Jones himself interviewed the boy. And whether it was due to him being in law enforcement and the boy getting scared, or something else, the boy finally caved and admitted that he was not 9-year-old Walter Collins, but instead he was 12-year-old Arthur Hutchins. He went on to tell Captain Jones that his reason for faking his identity was because his home life was sadly very horrible. He was frequently abused by his stepmother and decided that he would run away. While on the run, he was actually mistaken for Walter due to their similar appearance, and Arthur decided to run with it and take on the identity of the missing 9-year-old from Los Angeles. He saw it as an opportunity to have a new family and to live in a city that he loved. He was also hoping that he would be able to meet his favorite actor, Tom Mix. 12-year-old Arthur Hutchins decided that it would be his plan, so he slightly altered his appearance to look more like Walter and then walked into a police station in Iowa and announced that he was the missing Walter Collins. The rest was history. It was at this point that Captain Jones realized the gravity of the situation and how he had committed a woman who was right all along, that the boy claiming to be her son wasn't. After 10 days of being committed to a psychiatric ward in LA County Hospital, Christine Collins was released. Once she was out, she immediately sued Captain J.J. Jones, and honestly, who can blame her? Christine did win the lawsuit, yet it was reported that Captain Jones never paid the money. And in the midst of all of this happening, with Arthur admitting that he faked his identity, with Christine being committed, and with Captain Jones being disgraced, there was one question that everyone still wondered. Where was Walter Collins? The question on where Walter Collins was, or what could have happened to him, was still the major focus of much of the public. Police, reeling from the embarrassment from the Arthur Hutchins fiasco, were still involved, but had no leads to go on. Now, more than ever, sightings of Walter were met with serious hesitation, as nobody wanted a repeat of what had happened. Christine, still determined to find her son, didn't give up. Yet, even though she refused to throw in the towel, and knowing that there were no leads onto where Walter could have gone, Christine wasn't blind to the fact that she may never see him again. And if it wasn't for an 11-year-old boy named Sandra Clark, many wonder if there would have ever been any developments on Walter. Sanford Clark was the 11-year-old nephew of a man named Gordon Stewart Northcott. How they tie into Walter Collins is unfortunately not in a good way. The background of Sanford was that he was used by Gordon Northcott as somewhat of a farmhand. The boy helped as he could, but with it only being himself and his Uncle Gordon being the only people there for a majority of the time, it led Sanford to be at the mercy of Gordon. And due to that, things rarely ended well for Sanford. I won't go into detail here on the things that Gordon did to Sanford, but the type of abuse that he suffered were things that no child, let alone human, should ever have to experience. Due to the wounds that Sanford suffered, it wasn't long before people, particularly family members, began to notice. Most significantly was Sanford's older sister, Jessie, who, when visiting once, noticed the wounds that Sanford had all over his body, and actually got him to open up about what was going on. And shockingly, it wasn't just the abuse that he talked about. He also told Jessie that Gordon had killed 4 boys on the ranch. Armed with this information, Jessie informed authorities, and after getting a sworn complaint from Jessie, the LAPD sent immigration services to the ranch to follow up. On August 31st, 1928, immigration officers arrived at the ranch. Seeing this, Gordon immediately fled the area and ran into a nearby tree line to hide. He threatened to kill Sanford if he didn't stall them. Sanford, fearing for his life, did exactly that, and for the next 2 hours was able to stall the officers. When he finally felt that he was safe, he informed them of what George had told him to do, and the entire time that Sanford was stalling them, George was on the run. Over the course of the next several weeks, George and his mother, Sarah Louise, were on the run. That was until September 19th of 1928, when they were arrested near British Columbia. Once being arrested, Sanford told police that he had assisted Sarah Louise and Gordon in abducting, assaulting, and killing 4 boys over the course of 2 years. Sanford then led police to where the bodies were buried. However, these shallow graves didn't contain any complete bodies, but instead only pieces. It would later be learned from Sarah and Gordon that during their time on the run, they returned to the ranch and dug up the bodies to dispose of them. Those remains have never been found. The remains that were found in these shallow graves were altogether 51 pieces of bones. The types of wounds that were suffered matched with the stories that Sanford was telling police, and they were able to conclude that the remains belonged to 2 brothers named Lewis and Nelson Winslow. The 3rd victim was never identified, and the 4th was speculated to be that of Walter Collins. Given that the ranch was just over an hour away from Los Angeles, the possibility was there. Police kept this idea quiet for a while. That was until Sarah Louise confessed that one of the boys killed was in fact Walter Collins. Gordon also backed up this claim and also stated that he had killed more than the police knew about. Sarah maintained that she had killed Walter, but was never taken to trial since she admitted guilt. However, she was spared the death penalty due to the judge taking pity on her since she was a woman. And as blood-boiling as this is about to make you, Sarah Louise Northcott, who participated in the abuse and murder of 4 boys, was released from prison after given a life sentence after only 11 years. The even more frustrating thing is that Gordon wasn't even prosecuted for the murder of Walter, since Sarah confessed to it. Gordon was instead charged with the murders of the Winslow brothers and the unidentified 3rd boy. His trial, which lasted less than a month, resulted in a guilty verdict, and he was sentenced to death. The problem that came out with all of this in regards to Walter was that during the time between Gordon being arrested to after his trial, both he and his mother would continue to admit to the murders, but then they would recount their statements. Then they would go back and say they were telling the truth. Sarah herself said she killed Walter 3 different times and went back on them each time. Gordon himself wanted to actually talk to Christine shortly after his trial. Christine agreed, and when she went to go talk to Gordon, he did what he had been doing the entire time. He first confessed, then he recounted his confession, then he started lying about numerous other things surrounding the case. before admitting to the crime all over again. Christine realized that she couldn't believe a word out of his mouth, and she actually left the meeting with Gordon hopeful that Walter was still alive. And if that wasn't enough, if Christine hadn't suffered enough through this whole ordeal, Gordon reached out to her one final time, and in his words, he wanted to tell her everything, if she would just meet with him one last time. This certainly would be the final time, as his execution was to be carried out hours later. Upon Christine arriving to talk to Gordon again, he began screaming that he was innocent. Little did Gordon realize, however, was that Christine was actually testing him to see if he could give any detail at all about Walter, to which Gordon couldn't. He had no incriminating information about Walter, but more so, he didn't give a single detail about Walter other than his name. He refused to answer any questions that she had that would require Gordon to answer about some type of physical feature regarding Walter. Him dodging these questions further increased Christine's hope that Walter was in fact alive. Gordon Stewart Northcott was executed a few hours following this conversation. As for answers, there were not many to be found following the execution of Gordon. Sanford was sent to live with other family members. He was repeatedly questioned about Walter, and every time he gave the same answer, that there were only ever 3 boys at that ranch. Those were the Winslow brothers and Walter Collins. The other unidentified boy was never actually brought to the ranch, according to Sanford. To date, no more information has come forward about Walter Collins. There was, of course, the occasional sighting of him in the following years, but nothing concrete ever surfaced. For Christine, she never gave up. Even after everything that she had gone through, the public disaster of Arthur pretending to be her son, to be committed against her will to a psychiatric hospital, to be toyed with and lied to by a predator, and still never having any solid answers as to what happened to her son. The story of Christine Collins is tragic, but also somewhat beautiful. Even after all of what she went through, she still never gave up hope that her son could be alive. Christine Collins continued searching for Walter until her death in 1964. She stayed in Los Angeles the entire time, and when asked by the police, reporters, or just curious people, she always told them she would never stop looking. For her to continue on with something like that, even 30 years later, speaks volumes, and not only the type of mother that she was, but the type of woman that she was. Many who read this case are torn on what actually happened with Walter Collins. To police and to much of the media, Walter Collins perished at the hands of Gordon Stewart Northcott. With the relative closeness of the ranch to Los Angeles, with Sanford never changing his story, and with no confirmed sighting of Walter since March 10th of 1928, it does make it hard to look at it from the perspective of Walter being alive. Regardless of what actually happened to Walter, I can only hope that both he and Christine were able to find peace. If it was in fact true that Walter died at the ranch, then I like to think that when Christine passed away on December 8th, 1964, that she was finally reunited with her son.